Eve Carson was born on November 19, 1985, in Athens, Georgia. From an early age, she distinguished herself as someone highly motivated and determined. During high school, she served as vice president of the student council, volunteered at a nursing home, and also at a shelter for abused teens. In addition to that, she worked as a congressional page and helped in a stem cell research laboratory, all while still a student. After graduating from high school with honors, Eve attended the University of North Carolina, where she pursued a double major in political science and biology. Her outstanding academic performance earned her a prestigious scholarship, and she quickly emerged as a campus leader, taking on important positions in several student organizations. Yet she didn't stop there. Eve maintained her dedication to charitable work and even taught science classes at an elementary school. She also traveled overseas for volunteer missions, spending a summer in Ecuador helping doctors, studying for a semester in Cuba, and joining a research team in Egypt. Eve was, without question, one of the most remarkable students at her university. She had ambitious goals for her future, and she was clearly on the right path. Even before finishing college, she had already received a job offer from a major company and planned to begin her career right after earning her degree. In March 2008, Eve was 22 years old and in her senior year at the university. At that time, she lived in a house just off campus with a close group of friends. On the night of March 5th, around 1:30 a.m., her roommates were heading out to a party. They invited Eve to join them, but she declined because she had classes to prepare for and preferred to stay home to study. So her friends left without her and didn't return until 4:30 in the morning. When they came back, something instantly felt wrong. The front door was standing wide open. The lights inside were still on, but Eve was nowhere to be found, and her car was missing as well. It didn't make sense. Why would Eve leave in the middle of the night, and why would she leave the door open? Her friends tried calling her, but she didn't pick up. Still, they assumed something unexpected must have happened. Maybe she had to step out suddenly, so they decided to wait, hoping she'd return soon. But by the next day, there was still no sign of Eve. That's when one of her friends decided it was time to contact the police and file a missing person report. As soon as Eve's friend described the situation to investigators, they told her something chilling. Earlier that morning, police had discovered the body of a young woman, though she had not yet been identified. They showed the friend a photo of the victim, and she instantly recognized Eve. It turned out that around 5 a.m., just a short time after Eve went missing, police received a call from a woman who lived about a mile from Eve's home. She reported being startled awake by the sound of gunfire, followed by a blood-curdling scream. Frightened and unsure of what was happening, she immediately contacted authorities. When officers arrived in the area, they found the body of a young woman lying on the ground. She had no identification, no phone, nothing that could reveal who she was. The only thing investigators could confirm at that point was that she had been shot several times. Once Eve's friend identified her, detectives interviewed her roommates and pieced together a rough timeline. At 1:30 a.m., Eve was still at home studying. By 5 a.m., she was found dead a mile away. The pressing question now was how she ended up there and who was responsible. Since Eve's car was missing, detectives suspected it might have been a robbery. That theory gained more weight when they searched her room and realized her wallet and credit cards were missing too, and they weren't found anywhere near her body either. Medical examiners also confirmed there were no signs of sexual assault, which helped rule out another possible motive. When police checked her phone records, they saw the last signal came from a cell tower near a highway just outside town, but the phone itself was never recovered. It seemed the killer had likely tossed it somewhere into the woods. Then detectives got their first significant lead. A car matching the description of Eve's vehicle had been discovered abandoned only a few miles from her home. The car was immediately turned over to forensic experts for fingerprint and DNA testing. Meanwhile, investigators uncovered another clue. Forensics analyzed Eve's computer, the one she had been studying on, and determined that it was active until about 3:30 a.m. That meant she had still been home for at least 2 hours after her friends left for the party. Only after that did she somehow end up a mile away, where her body was eventually found. By then, news of Eve's murder had spread across the city, and her college campus was in shock. Nearly everyone knew her. She was active in nearly every major student organization, and no one could believe she was gone. Alongside the grief, fear began to spread. People were scared for their own safety, and the fact that police had no concrete leads only made things worse. As a result, detectives were flooded with tips. Students called in with anything remotely suspicious, trying to help in any way they could. But despite the influx of leads, none brought investigators closer to solving the mystery. Soon, however, investigators received a key piece of information. Since it appeared that the killer had stolen Eve's credit cards, they decided to pull her transaction history. What they found was shocking. Just 18 minutes after Eve last used her computer, someone withdrew $700 from her account through 2 separate transactions. The person then attempted to withdraw more but was denied after hitting the daily limit. The ATM used for the withdrawals was located near a shopping plaza on the opposite side of town. Detectives immediately requested the security footage, and sure enough, they got a hit. The video showed a man sitting in Eve's car, using her card at the ATM. In the back seat, there appeared to be another person. Investigators suspected it could have been Eve, but the footage was too grainy to say for certain. Forensic experts tried enhancing the footage for a clearer view, but it didn't help. Meanwhile, police learned that the suspect had attempted to use Eve's card at several other ATMs around the city, but none of those machines had working surveillance cameras. This continued until March 7th, when police received another alert about an attempted withdrawal. This time, the suspect had appeared at a 24-hour convenience store around 12:30 a.m. and tried to use the ATM, but Eve's bank declined the transaction. Officers rushed to the store, which was located in a nearby town, and this one did have functioning security cameras. When they reviewed the footage from that night, they saw someone trying to use Eve's card, but there was a twist. It wasn't the same man from the earlier ATM footage. Investigators now had to consider the possibility that more than one person was involved in Eve's murder, or that the killer had given her card to someone else. They attempted to identify the second suspect, but just like before, the footage quality was too poor to produce a match. So detectives turned to the public for help. They released both surveillance photos to the media, hoping someone would recognize the suspects. Since almost everyone in the area had already heard about the case, the phones at the station lit up with calls. But once again, none of the tips brought police any closer to finding who had killed Eve Carson. That all changed on March 12th, when police finally received a promising lead. An anonymous caller reached out, claiming to recognize the man from the second surveillance video, the one from the convenience store. According to him, the man's name was Demario Atwater. Detectives began digging into Atwater's background, and what they discovered was alarming. At only 21 years old, he already had an extensive criminal history. He'd been arrested multiple times for robbery, assault, drug charges, and other offenses. He had served time in prison but had also been released early on several occasions. They also learned that just 2 days after Eve's murder, Demario was scheduled to appear in court for being caught with a handgun while on probation. Investigators pulled up Atwater's old mugshots and compared them to the footage from the convenience store. The resemblance was unmistakable. It was clearly the same man. They also found out that Demario lived near that store, so detectives went straight to his house. During questioning, Demario insisted he had nothing to do with the murder, but the surveillance footage was enough to arrest him. As police continued their investigation, they discovered that Demario was in frequent contact with a 17-year-old named Lawrence Levet, who, despite his young age, already had a criminal record of his own. When detectives reviewed Lawrence's mugshots, they immediately recognized him. He was the person behind the wheel of Eve's car in the first ATM footage. But unlike Demario, Lawrence refused to go quietly. He barricaded himself inside his home, and the situation escalated so quickly that SWAT had to be called in. When officers finally took him into custody, he too denied any involvement. Both men were booked and held in jail while awaiting trial. Since neither of them was cooperating, investigators focused on building their case. They analyzed cell phone data, and what they found was significant. On the night Eve was killed, both suspects' phones pinged off a tower near her neighborhood, even though they lived in another city. Detectives believed DeMario and Lawrence had chosen Eve at random, that they were simply out looking for someone to rob and noticed she was home alone late at night. Based on the pattern of ATM withdrawals, it appeared they forced her to drive with them to several locations where she provided her PIN. Once they realized they couldn't withdraw more than $700 because of the daily limit, they drove her to a wooded area on the outskirts of town, where they killed her. Because of the brutal nature of the crime, prosecutors announced they would seek the death penalty for DeMario. Lawrence's case was more complex. Since he was a minor, the harshest possible sentence he could receive was life imprisonment. But prosecutors knew the evidence they had might not be enough for a guaranteed conviction, so they made a strategic move. They offered DeMario a plea deal, plead guilty in exchange for removing the death penalty from consideration. He agreed. DeMario admitted that he and Lawrence had set out that night looking to commit a robbery and make some quick money. According to his account, Lawrence called and suggested they go to the university campus to find a victim. While driving through a neighborhood, they spotted Eve through a window in her home, and that's when they decided to act. Armed with guns, they broke in and forced her into her own car. Afterward, they drove to multiple ATMs, attempting to withdraw as much money as possible. Throughout the ordeal, Eve pleaded with them to let her go. She promised not to tell anyone and said she just wanted to go home. But they had other plans. According to DeMario, they decided to kill her because she had seen their faces, even though they made no effort to conceal their identities. In the end, they drove her to that deserted street and shot her multiple times using 2 firearms. DeMario also revealed something deeply heartbreaking. Right before they killed her, Eve asked them to pray with her. Instead, they coldly opened fire. In April 2010, 2 years after the murder, DeMario was found guilty. Because of the plea deal, the judge sentenced him to life in prison instead of the death penalty, along with an additional 30 years. After the verdict, DeMario turned to Eve's parents, apologized for his actions, and said he deserved whatever punishment he received. As for Lawrence, he refused to plead guilty, and his trial began in December 2011. Despite his attorney's attempts to convince the jury of his innocence, DeMario's confession combined with the physical evidence was overwhelming. Lawrence was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. But his story didn't end there. In 2013, the State Court of Appeals overturned his sentence, citing a precedent that ruled life without parole for juvenile offenders as excessively harsh and unnecessary. As a result, Lawrence was granted a new trial. This time, he was more outspoken than before. He told the court that everyone makes mistakes and insisted he wasn't the monster people thought he was. Still, he showed no genuine remorse for his actions, and ultimately, the judge once again sentenced him to life in prison. It's also worth noting that Lawrence was suspected in another eerily similar case. In January 2008, just months before Eve's murder, someone broke into the apartment of a 29-year-old student and killed him. Afterward, money was withdrawn from the victim's account at several ATMs throughout the city. However, detectives were never able to gather sufficient evidence to formally link Lawrence to that crime, so the charges were eventually dropped. Eve's case didn't just make national headlines, it led to real change. In the summer of 2008, North Carolina lawmakers passed new legislation imposing tougher penalties and stricter procedures for anyone involved in gang-related crimes. It went into effect on December 1st and applied to all crimes committed from that day forward. The law was created directly in response to what had happened to Eve. At her university, a scholarship was established in her name, and a memorial garden was built on campus to honor her memory. In 2009, one of Eve's close friends became a finalist on American Idol. While performing on stage, he spoke about how her death had inspired him to take the leap and audition. He said that without Eve, he never would have found the courage or determination to pursue his dream. If you found this case intriguing, make sure to like and subscribe. We upload new crime case videos every night. Stay tuned, and brace yourself for what's coming next.